to episode 5 of the Barleymen. I'm Jason.
And I'm Michael.
And in this episode we're going to discuss Belgian Trappist beers, specifically the trio in front of you. We've got Westmalle, Chimay, and Rochefort. And before we delve into the intricacies of what a Trappist ale is, which is a very good question, I'd like to talk briefly just about what my thoughts are about Belgian beer.
I mean, for sure, you can talk about Belgian beer, and then I'm going to tell you about Trappist.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. So, yeah, my knowledge of Belgian beers is not that deep, but for me, I've always really been fascinated by them, just the fact that of the big three, now when I say the big three for me, I think of Germany, England, and Belgium. These are the powerhouses of European brewing, the most influential when it comes to the history of beer in Europe. And of those three, Belgium definitely stands out as being quite unique. I would go so far as to say that they're mavericks, just the fact that they've got so many more styles and they do so many more different things when you look at them compared to German brewers versus English brewers. Especially for, well, a couple things. One is their use of yeast. I would say of all, of those three countries, Belgium is definitely the most yeast forward. They use yeast, the sweet, funky, and sour notes to balance the malt, much like hops is used. And I think traditionally Belgium would use yeast actually more than hops. However, that is changing. I've noticed lately that Belgium is starting to use more and more hops. But traditionally, it was yeast and some other things that the Belgians would use to offset the malts to give you that balance, to balance out the sweetness or cloyiness of the malt. So for me, a couple things. It's the yeast, and also it's the Belgians' use of adjuncts. Now, adjuncts are anything that are outside of the German purity law, anything beyond those four ingredients. And the Belgians are really adept, and they're quite enthusiastic about adjuncts. And these include the addition of candy sugar to increase in the fermentation and increase the alcohol content, as well as several spices like coriander, grains of paradise, and then also orange peels, in fact. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
well, and honestly, because you're talking about both of these things, one of the things that really makes Belgian ales different is completely in the yeast. They have to use a specifically different yeast strain because what became widely available at the turn of the century, at the end of the last century, and then at the turn of the century, was sugar. And you can use, so if you go to England and you use the yeast that most English porters and stouts use, that yeast is attenuated lower, meaning it can only eat so many of the sugars before it falls out and dies. So the secret to a good Belgian beer or ale is the yeast. It acts at high temperatures and it really eats up all the sugars, and in fact, over about 70 degrees Fahrenheit is where it really starts emitting those fruity esters, which is what gives Belgian its very distinctive beer taste.
Right. Yeah. Totally. For me, there are some similarities between the Belgian beers and the German beers, but it always to me comes back to the yeast. Like when I smell a German beer versus a Belgian, I can usually distinguish based on the yeast.
Yeah, and they take their yeast very seriously. We're going to talk a little more about that as we get into Abbey and Trappist, but yes.
That brings up something. So, okay, there's the term Abbey and there's the term Trappist. What is a Trappist beer?
Okay, so a Trappist beer, legally, the legal definition of a Trappist beer is that it is brewed by monks or under the supervision of monks in a certified Trappist abbey. To understand this idea of Trappist Abbey, you have to think back to the history of brewing in general. So I'm going to kind of go back from that a second and talk about the world in general, and then I'm going to bring it back to the specifics of what makes it a Trappist. So we go back in time. The year is 1292, and we are travelers on the road, and we don't know anyone in the village that we're going into. Where are we going to stay?
The pub. Tavern.
So pubs and taverns were not really widespread until a little bit later on.
Hostel.
There is no such thing as a hostel.
Dang it. Okay.
So we are going to go. Nope. Oh, well, maybe you could maybe stay at a farm.
My dad would say that. That's the answer he'd go with.
But most travelers,
Okay.
what they did is they went and they ended up at a monastery. So Benedictine monks, one of the things that Benedictine monks are known for, and it's in their creed, is to be host to travelers. So you have these very localized monasteries where travelers are staying, and of course you're not just going to let them sleep for the night, you have to also feed them, and water being what it is back then, so water quality is a crapshoot. You don't know if you just drank out of the local water sources what sort of thing's going to happen.
Right.
So beer is widespread because the processing of brewing is going to clean up the water.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these monasteries had several levels of beer. The best beer, of course, goes to the monks. Then there was a medium one for the discerning or important guest, and then there was just the common one for everyone. So that's where we get this idea of abbey beers. And what's also very important to understand is at this point in history, when you think about the Catholic Church and you think about it coming out of Rome, there was a huge love of wine, but beer was really the drink of the pagan. So in order to help them incorporate pagans into the church, they did several things. They aligned the holidays so that the big drinking holidays of pagans became the Christian holidays.
Yes.
They also started taking over the production of beer. And when they did so, how they did it is they did it in the most sanitary way that you could expect in medieval times. They really cleaned up. So they actually had rules like if you find a dead mouse in the beer, you cannot drink that beer. That beer is no good. They took what had been spiritual and recreational for pagans, and they instituted it into the church, and then they would have things like fundraisers where you would go down into the basement and everybody would be getting drunk, and it was as raucous as any pagan festival, but now the money's going to the church to either fund the specific monastery or to fund the church in general. Okay. So that's something basic about abbey beers. The other thing that really came about besides the sanitation is they brought about all of these herbs, all of these spices, all of these, you called them additives? Adjuncts.
Yes.
So it's funny because the adjuncts were part of brewing long before hops were.
Oh, yes.
And so your gardener, your herbalist, inside a monastery would write all the information that they knew, and they called that an herbal. And in the herbals, we see, remember the Roman Empire had collapsed. So when the Roman Empire was around, spices were abundant from all over the earth. But as it collapsed, trade shipping collapsed. The church eventually starts bringing those things back in, but the abundance of spice was quite rare, even to the point that lords in the medieval time would will their spices to their heirs, their spice chests. One of the things that these monasteries were known for was having elaborate and with the largest selection as they can, they had these gardens of herbs and spices, and so you combine that with the taxing of people working on church lands, so they have grains aplenty. Now they start distilling what we would call a gruit or a group, right? So they aren't using hops, but they are using tons and tons of grains, more so in fact than most beers we find today. These medieval ales, these abbey ales coming from the monastery, were very meaty. They were hearty. You could almost look at them as like meals,
right.
With all kinds of various spices. So they would use the herbals. They would have these well-stocked gardens. They had plenty of grains, and they would put in, imagine like a tea. It would be like if you and I are having tea, instead of using a single tea bag, suddenly we decide to use 4 tea bags. We get a super strong tea. In these cases, with additions of grains, we get a super strong grain sugar base to make the alcohol, which makes the alcohol content higher. And when you make the alcohol content higher, the beer doesn't go sour as fast and it lasts longer.
And that's where you get the names double, triple, quadruple.
Yeah, so do you want to talk a little more about that? Like, what's a double?
So basically, when you say double or triple, and these are actually Dutch words from the northern part of Belgium, which is actually Flanders, where they speak Flemish, which is akin to Dutch. But basically, double is double. It's double the malt, triple the malt, quadruple the malt. And what that does is increase the alcohol and gives you a beer that's going to, well, it's going to be stronger, and also it's going to last longer.
Absolutely, and so then I have to mention this too. So we have the German purity law takes effect, and we talked about the Germany purity law on a previous episode. Please feel free to check it out. So because of the German purity law, what happens is you have these hops, and hops are a much better preservative. In fact, a medieval herbal says that hops make men's souls sad, and it makes the internal organs heavy.
I heard that.
So the monastic orders are not using hops, and that does two things. It means that the common man can just grab hops growing wherever it is without a tax, because there seems to be no value in it. When the Germans master the art of using hops to preserve their beer doesn't go sour. Their beer becomes a commercial enterprise everywhere. And now, these small monasteries that you'd have to be at or near in order to get their beer suddenly cannot compete.
Same with all the alewives.
Yep. So we talked about this previously, right? It puts the local, the home brewing out of business. It also puts strain on the abbeys. And in fact, so much so that Martin Luther and the Protestants, when they chose their beer, they liked their beer hopped. It was a rebellious symbol based on rejecting the church ale.
Interesting.
And by the way, once you get hopped beer, this is where pubs start springing up everywhere. So now you have these pubs and you have these inns, and people stop going to the monasteries for sanctuary, and now we're left with what? We're left with very localized abbey ales that are not even community-based like they used to be. And then you have these Protestants who are rebelling against the church because they like their beer hopped.
I can understand, and maybe now that explains a little bit more why I love hop beer so much. But okay, so I'm really excited to try these 3 Trappist ales. Now, one thing I just want to point out, this is from a graphic design point of view, but we've discussed earlier in this episode about what it takes to, legally and technically be defined as a Trappist brewery, and the number actually is dwindling. I think there's only like 5 left in Belgium.
And only 2 outside of Belgium.
There used to be one in the United States. It was Spencer's in Massachusetts. It went out of business in 2022. But anyway, going back.
And there is a possible new one coming to the United States called New Clairvaux. They have not been they have not been certified through the Trappist organization. Right. However, they do work with Sierra Brewing Company, the ones who make Sierra Pale Ale, and they have an Orville line, which is Abbey Ale.
But anyway, going back to just label design, how do you know if a beer is an official Trappist beer? I don't know.
It's on the back.
It's a hexagon. There's a little hexagon here, and what does it say? It says authentic Trappist product. And if you look,
here, hold it up.
Oh yes,
like this.
There we go. And then it's also right there, and I believe it should be.
Hold it up again.
Right there, and it should be, let's see, this guy here. Oh, right on the front. They're not even messing around, they put it right on the front.
And this is why perhaps you may have noticed, last episode we pulled out our Trappist Trio, and we pulled out a St. Bernard, and the problem is that St. Bernardus is not a Trappist beer, it is an Abbey Ale.
I mean, these beers in front of you are some of the top, I would say in the top 10 in the world. The one that we'd like to try sometime. You can only get in Belgium, though.
The legend.
I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Okay, so Westvleteren 12.
Westvleteren, yes.
Westvleteren 12 is considered by almost everyone the single best beer in the world. So why don't you tell us about this Rochefort here?
Okay, so this Rochefort comes in with, let's see here, 11.3 ABV. So it's quite strong. In fact, this is a quadrupel. This is a quad, so it has 4 times the amount of malt in it. It's pretty much all I know about this beer.
And by the way, the quadrupel. So when you think of was founded in the 13th century, but they didn't actually start making beer until 1595. Interestingly enough, though, in 1794 they got shut down. They stopped making beer. That didn't resume until the late 1800s. I think it was actually 1899 they finally get to make beer again. So when we look at a beer like this, it's great to imagine the medieval history, but if we're being honest, all Trappist beers, and for that matter, all abbey beers, you are not going to find a recipe currently in use that is older than 70 years old. Because what happens is that people don't want that very meaty meal in a bottle or meal in a glass.
Right.
They want it to be lighter body, higher alcohol, which is why these quadrupels do so well.
I see. You know, one thing I noticed, moving on to this guy, which is, I believe, the first Trappist ale.
Yes.
I don't know much about it, but I'll tell you something I do notice, Mike, right away. The design of this bottle, you see this ring?
Yes.
See this ring here? Now, it's interesting because there's two breweries in the United States that are, you know, a heavy homage to Belgium. There's New Belgium in Fort Collins, Colorado, here in Colorado, and there's also Ommegang Brewery in Cooperstown, New York. Both of them feature a similar design in their bottles. They both use the same ring as Westmalle as an homage. I just noticed that right now, but...
Absolutely. And we've already talked about New Belgium, of course,
yes.
And you've heard us made reference to Ommegang. It's almost like we have some favorites. This is a Westmalle Triple. And Westmalle Triple, okay, so Westmalle, the actual abbey, was founded in 1794. However, they don't really start brewing their first beers until 1836. And this has been continuously brewed, not this particular recipe, this has been brewed since 1836. Essentially what happened is after World War I, the Belgian population returning, they no longer wanted these meaty things. What they wanted was light, and this exact brew, the Westmalle Triple, when it first was released, was called Super Beer, because we've changed up the yeast, we've started using all these inverted sugars. Inverted beet sugars were what was most accessible inside of Belgium. So we get these very light, because the sugars just make the alcohol without leaving behind a heavier substance. We get these very light, very strong alcohols. One other fun fact about Westmalle is that the same yeast in this Westmalle Triple is used to make the legendary Westvleteren 12.
So this bottle right here screams French, and it screams wine. We've got a cork, we've got Chimay, which sounds French, but look, the fleur-de-lis. We've got two of those in here, also a deep blue. So if I was to, you know, especially in my early days, if I was to see this at a glance, I'd be like, oh, there's wine. But it's not. This is not wine. This is yet another of the Trappist ales. Anything else?
Yeah, quickly about Chimay.
What are we going to say about Chimay?
So Chimay was founded in 1862. Again, the reason why we see a French influence, France influences Belgium and vice versa, but the Cistercians started in France. And so the brewing tradition, even though it went all the way around and ended up in Belgium, has its roots in France.
But also Belgium was part of France at one time. I mean, for the longest time, it was part of northern France. There was Flanders, and the rest of Belgium was France, so there's that too.
I like it. Great. And
are we going to drink some beer or what?
We are. Oh, before we drink beer though, Jason.
Yes, Mike.
Because history abounds.
Oh, yes.
I want to talk about the glassware, shall we?
I think we should.
I was so excited about this glassware.
Yes, Mike went all out and decided for this episode that we needed to get the official glassware for these legends.
We do have the specific Chimay, and we do have the specific Westmalle. You may be familiar with this sort of Belgian glassware. Probably the most common is Stella Artois. And what you're seeing with it is this is a direct homage back to the medieval roots. These are not glasses. These are chalices. So today we are going to use the Chimay for the Chimay, the Westmalle for the Westmalle, and we're going to use a Westmalle for the Rochefort. All right, let's start with Rochefort, I think.
Okay.
Go ahead, talk about this color.
Murky, dark, medium to dark brown, kind of like a cocoa-y brown.
I was thinking toffee, like a toffee brown.
Yeah, at the bottom.
I'm getting It's definitely fresh baked farmhouse bread, like a heavy bread, a dense bread.
It's deep, strong malt, like powerful malt. I'm getting some spice as well.
Yeah, on the end it has a tang, kind of
Yeah.
almost apple-y.
I'm wondering.
It's not as fruity as apple.
I'm wondering if that's esters from the yeast.
And it could be. So,
it's definitely a complex nose.
yeah. So murky, toffee-ish brown bread with some sort of fruity note to it.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of maybe raisins or prunes.
Well, let's take a sip, shall we?
All right. How would we cheers in Belgium?
A votre santé.
A votre santé.
To your health. Interesting.
Ooh.
Not a lot of sizzle. It pretty much, though, is a full mouthfeel.
Yeah, it's. I'm not getting much carbonation at all. It's definitely heavy malt.
I'm going with. I really am tasting something appley or peary.
Yeah.
It has that very fruit note to it. So it has that dark. So think like dark rye bread with maybe some like apple butter on it, and that's kind of how it's hitting me. So it's got that very hearty feel in the beginning, and then there's this fruit note that just floats to my nose.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting like the rich malt, like dark grain, like dark bread. There's dark bread for me, like maybe even like kind of older bread, and there is a sourness, and I don't know if that's the yeast that's kind of balancing that out. There's definitely, for me, I'm getting like a fruity sourness.
Yeah, and I mean, all right, the shemang. 1862. This is very interesting. So it's not the bread. The bread smell was definitely from the Rochefort.
This is an unusual nose for me. This is, I don't know, I'm almost getting a slight like acrid notes. I don't know what that's coming from.
Yeah, so I was going to describe this as, this is weird, and maybe it's the rim on the glass. It smells like cold metal.
I'm getting copper.
Yeah.
Like the copper, like the acrid like tones of copper, which is not exactly what I go for in a beer, but
it smells kind of like cold metal.
Maybe a little bit of like aged dried fruit.
Yeah, like raisin or plum?
Yeah, raisin, a little bit of raisin.
Yeah, well, let's taste it. It can't taste like how it smells.
Better, actually.
Way better.
I think this is interesting. It's like some cheeses or whatever, or some beers I've had in the past. Not impressed with the nose, really, honestly speaking. But the body of this is creamy. I'm getting a creamier mouthfeel. I actually, already I like the mouthfeel over the Rochefort.
Agreed. This sizzled. It sizzled across my tongue.
Mm-hmm. This is a much better balance. This is smooth, and it's got a really nice mouthfeel. I do like this.
It does.
It's definitely, it seems like there's more carbonation going on here.
For sure. This is sizzling everywhere. So the first one, it filled my mouth. This one's making like a straight channel, and it's fizzing up the nose, which is what I want, because I'm going to get the better taste that way.
Right.
So this is, go ahead and...
so this is the West Malt Tripel, but look at that color. We got, let's see what we have there. Let me clear it up. Oh, it's like a light amber, golden sunshine, lots of plumes of carbonation. I'm seeing quite a bit of sediment in there, and I'm wondering what we're looking at. That could be yeast. It could be other adjuncts like spices. I don't think it's spices, though. I bet that's yeast.
It's yeast.
Yeah,
I think it's yeast, and it's a honey color.
Uh-huh.
You got the bubbles coming up. You got little bits of sediment coming down. Let's nose it. Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! floral.
Of the three noses, this is leaps and bounds above the other ones.
Oh, it's so pleasant.
It's so pleasant. It's so inviting. And the interesting thing, you want to talk about, what times or experiences these evoke. Both of these would be your dark, cold months, whereas this, despite being a very strong beer ABV-wise, this is more, spring, summer.
I think first spring.
Yeah,
I agree
spring.
with you on spring, and here's why. Because immediately, I'm hit with the floral and the herbal notes, and we're walking out into a garden just waking up, right? Whereas with the Chimay, I agree with you. Chimay, this is dark and it's cold outside, and I'm inside. And same with the Rochefort. And I don't know. I think we need to have a sip.
I think so too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very nice.
That is the perfect amount of sizzle. So this one sizzled harder across my tongue, but this one sizzled and went up to my palate, the roof of my mouth, and right to the nose. And it's very floral, and it's very herbal, and it's...
Yeah, there's a nice clarity about it, and also the finish is nice, clean and dry.
Wow. There we have it.
I would get rid of this guy. This would be your spring beer, and then on a cold wintry day, this would be fitting. I just like the fact that it really surprised me when it came to the taste, because from the nose, I was like, this is not going in a good direction.
You're like metal.
Metal, yeah, metal forward beer. No thanks.
So my clear winner, and I think I speak for you as well.
You do.
My clear winner today is the West Malm Triple. It is everything that a Belgian beer, in my imagination, is supposed to represent. It is light, it is delightful, it has herbal notes, it has floral notes, there's a hint of spice in it.
Hint of spice, just a hint.
Yep, just a hint of spice. It opens well on the palate. It's strong.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Westmalle the winner
Yes.
today. I'm just fascinated with the humanity and the history that comes behind even these modern offerings of something before.
I agree. All right, well, so let's talk about our next episode. What do we got coming up?
I don't know, Jason. What do we have coming up?
Good question. So we're going to switch gears in more ways than one. We are going to go and discover and explore this Japanese whiskey. We have Hibiki Japanese Harmony, which is a blended whiskey from Japan. And so in our next episode, we're going to explore this.
Well, that sounds amazing. I do have to say, I think I've only had Japanese whiskey maybe twice before this.
Well, you better prepare.
All right, I got a week.
All right. Well, as we always say at the Barleymen,
I'm Michael.
I'm Jason.
And never stop exploring. You did not expect me to go off.
I had a feeling you would.